Thank you. Sorry, technical difficulties this morning. I wanted to welcome everybody to our second Connected and Autonomous Vehicle Workshop hosted by the French FBRMPO and Land of Sky Clean Vehicles Coalition. Our first workshop occurred in January 2020 in person at the North Carolina Arboretum. As a reminder, just during that event, we had a panel discussion from presenters, including Joe Hummer with NCDOT, who summarized connected vehicles and their impact on safety, Dana Maglioli from NCDOT, who presented on policy and planning work, Skip Yeakel from Volvo, who provided a private sector perspective focusing on freight with a discussion on platooning and Volvo's CAV technology, Katie Brunk, a Kinley Horn analyst who presented her master's thesis on the ethics of CAVs, and Michael Laughlin with the Department of Energy, who shared about the energy efficiency potential in CAVs, emphasizing the future of mobility that hinges on consumer behavior. After the panel discussions during our first workshop, attendees participated in a group discussion to identify the best next steps for our region. This second workshop serves as a follow-up to that event. And in this event, we'll hear from a variety of panelists who cover the topics about the current state of connected and autonomous vehicles and the future of CAVs. Our first presentation will be provided by Jenny Larios Berlin from Optimus Ride. She'll be followed by our keynote speaker, Julie White, the Deputy Secretary of Multimodal Transportation, Stephanie Sedano, a multimodal special projects engineer at NCDOT, and Aaron Clark, policy analyst in the City of Pittsburgh Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. I want to thank you all so much for your interest in this topic and in your attendance today. Also, a huge thanks to our presenters who are taking time from their busy schedules to share their experience in the realm of connected and autonomous vehicles. And on that note, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Jenny.
Okay, wonderful. Can everybody see my screen? Can you hear me?
Yes, Jenny, you're good. We can see your screen and we can hear you.
Wonderful. Okay, well, thanks so much for the invitation. I'm really excited to be with all of you here today because you guys help really set the tone for how communities should be thinking about this technology and how to make it valuable and accessible to all of your constituents. And really that's what it should always be about, is how are we putting people first and making sure that we are listening to their needs and being responsive to them. And that's a lot of what Optimus Ride has tried to do as we try to use shared electric autonomous mobility solutions to connect people to their communities within their communities. So just to kind of get us started, Optimus Ride is a company that was founded in Massachusetts. We are a MIT spinout, so we are a collection of urban planning nerds, urban design nerds, computer science nerds, and entrepreneurship nerds, really trying to come together and think about what are the practical, safe ways that autonomous mobility solutions can be implemented and adopted in our environments. And so that's what happened in 2015, where we started thinking about the technology and this is sort of safe path for adoption. And for us, the safe path for adoption meant to be practical, which is how do you keep this technology at low speeds? How do you help this technology truly understand its environment? And what we decided is that the best way for this technology to truly understand its environment is by being geofenced. That is to say that it picks a certain radius, it picks a certain geography, And then it really tries to understand, what are the curb cuts like? What is the street design? Are there bike lanes here? Is there parallel parking? How many pedestrians versus motorcyclists versus buses versus tractor trailers versus single occupancy vehicles traverse this particularly defined environment, so that the more we can understand, the less the tale of unpredictability. And that is really the most complex aspect of this technology, is trying to account for that really long tail of unpredictability. And the more that you can reduce that unpredictability, the better you have to create a path to a truly driverless system, which many, if not all, in this industry are not at this time. Despite their claims, they are not. They either have a chase vehicle, they have somebody in the passenger, or they have a safety driver behind the steering wheel. So as a company, when we came together, it was really about thinking about community focused, safe, sustainable. So that's the other piece, where you do this shared model with electric vehicles, so that you can really push on the sustainability agenda, both for your communities, but also sort of at a large scope. And then really thinking about convenience and equitability. So the convenience aspect is really thinking about, what are people's needs in terms of how they move around in the community, and enabling that, so that if they're trying to choose between a third car or a second car, they don't have to, because they know that they have this option. Or even choosing between being more multimodal, whether it's a bike, a motorcycle, and a solution like this, and ideally more equitable, so that you're also looking at an affordable price point, because you're able to provide this in an autonomous way, where you might still have people observing the system, but it's almost like a horizontal elevator, in the sense that you may have one person observing more than one vehicle, so that you can get economies of scale. And so that's really where we've been now in 2021, is thinking about that scale and that growth. So I'll tell you a little bit more about our sites as we sort of go along this path. So just a little bit more on how we think about safety. We have to think about safety both at the individual level, but it's not just the individual that's in the vehicle. It's also the individual that's outside of the vehicle. And on top of that, it's the groups of people and the communities that are interacting with these vehicles as well, because they are very much a element of the community, and as a result need to have a very strong dialogue with what's in and what's out and what's around. So for us, when we think about our riders, it really is about thinking about the vehicle and the form factor. So in the previous slide, you saw it was sort of this 6-seater. It is a low-speed electric vehicle. And what we find is, when you use low-speed vehicles, you reduce the probability of mortality in an accident by 80%. And so just being able to do that along with the shared vehicle in a geofenced environment continues to set the tone for safety and enable greater adoption, while at the same time still solving for transportation needs and making this a convenient mobility solution. Our vehicles are tested in simulation, as well as in closed courses. And our closed course, it also is outdoors, and it accepts all the elements. So rain, fog, snow, because we're in Boston, and having all of those different types of environmental considerations, and we roll that into our testing. And in that private course is where we can take many of the, if you will, unpredictable events and recreate them there on top of what we've done in simulation, so that we can get real world responses and see how individuals in our team respond. And then how do we use that to better understand how the user would think about these different interactions, to really account for sensitivities that people have as they think about whether they want to use this technology or not. Other things in terms of the vehicle is, we do have a safety driver in the vehicle at this time. Many providers actually have more than one person. So one person is dedicated to looking at the environment and being behind the steering wheel. And then you have others who are actually annotating and observing what is happening with the ride. And that's what we've done in our case. And then unlike other AV vehicles, we do have every seat with its own seatbelt, so that individuals can appropriately restrain themselves in the vehicle as the vehicle is in motion. And then as we think about communities, we really are a Vision Zero company. We do believe that most places ought to go at no more than sort of a 20 to 25 mile per hour. It makes it safer for non-vehicle motorists to want to be on the street environment. So aside from pedestrians, this is talking about scooters, this is talking about bicyclists, this is talking about rollerbladers, this is talking about skateboarders, and there's really new and exciting types of uni transport, right? So these electrified skateboards and things of that nature, or like the uni wheel motorized planks, I guess. All of these different things are increasing the speed that individuals can move, but all that they have for protection is a helmet, if that at times. And so these are the types of sort of additional transportation modes that are being introduced that systems like this need to be responsive and sensitive to. And then we also have a multitude of different types of sensors in our vehicle. And so this is what you refer to multi-redundancy systems. This includes things like a LiDAR. So a LiDAR is basically a laser radar where it spits out light beams, and then it tries to get the information back to get a good understanding of the environment. You also have cameras, you have radars that are exclusive, as well as all of the software that's on top of this hardware system to really understand the environments. And then we also provide nighttime safe rides as another way of sort of saying you have this really safe vehicle that understands the environment very deeply, and how do we use it in ways that help communities in multiple different facets. So jumping over to the communities that are already benefiting from our services, go from left to right. These are all active deployments. These are locations where we are providing services or on a daily basis and connecting individuals to specific needs. So for example, on the left, the Brooklyn Navy Yard, we started this project in August of 2019. This is a true first and last mile connectivity in the sense that we provide connection from the ferry stop that was launched in 2019 to the access gates of this 300-acre private road industrial campus. And so our job is to connect folks that land from the ferry or are at the access gates of this campus, and connecting these two spots between access gates and the ferry landing. As we've been working on that particular use case, we also noticed a need for intra-campus mobility. So this being where we are connecting folks from one end of the campus to another end of the campus, whether it's to connect them for meetings, whether it's to connect them for access to food options or the supermarket, because there's also, in this industrial campus, they also recently just opened a Wegmans. And so thinking about sort of all of these different use cases so that then we can look at the system, having already mapped the entire environment so that we can apply the technology to the needs of the tenants that are at that space. The next one is the Yards Connector. So this is a Brookfield property. This is based in Washington, D.C. The use case here is slightly different. This one, it is a mixed use development. It has commercial, it has retail, it has residential. And the goal of this particular site, because it's mostly a vertical build, it's not a horizontal build, they have as a result, have a smaller footprint, but what they're trying to do, because it's not that far from a highway that kind of disconnects the development from the rest of the city, they want to have an amenity such as ours where they can have us connect their tenants and their residents to the rest of DC. Effectively to say the rest of DC is within your fingertips, and this is how we're closing that gap for you so that you don't have to use your car, for example. And so what we're doing is providing connectivity from the yard's development to places like Capitol Hill. You have a lot of folks who work for the federal government and so want to have that easy connectivity to their places of employment in Capitol Hill. There's also other places that have amenities such as supermarkets, Trader Joe's, other types of retail. And what we've done with the client is we've prioritized what are these other locations so that we can then offer that to the users in Washington, DC that are a part of the yards. And, unlike the Brooklyn Navy Yard where they can just hop onto the vehicle, in the yards we provide a mobile app where they book the reservation, we pick them up, and then we drop them off. And if they want to make bookings in advance, they can do that as well. So that's what happens in that site. And then in the seaport, we have connectivity. This is primarily one that we've done with our employees, where we pick them up at one of the metro stops, and then we navigate Boston drivers, Boston infrastructure, and bring them to our place of work. This gives us an opportunity to, if you will, dog food our product so that our team can fully know what is the state of the art of our technology and then be responsive to those needs. And then one of the other projects that we have been working on diligently, looking for a potential launch in early next year, is a DOE grant that we received for $4.3 million to really research the sustainability impact of shared electric and connected autonomous mobility systems. And what that means is we are looking to provide a potential fleet of about 10 vehicles on the Clemson University site and doing a mix of both on-demand mobility and fixed route mobility. And the goal here is to compare it to what the standard or course of business would be to the normal transit solutions that are on the campus and compare that against the shared electric autonomous mobility solution to really see the sustainability impact by having a reduced fleet that you can platoon, because it's a smaller vehicles and you can get them into smaller nooks and crannies of the campus. And by having on demand, do you reduce additional vehicle miles traveled in the campus? And how does that then help the campus reclaim land that is currently being used for parking? So we're looking at parking infrastructure, we're looking at the different multimodal options that people have, and we're looking at reduction of overall vehicles on campus and how to optimize the routing through the campus when you have a dynamically routed technology such as the autonomous vehicle. So those are some of the different learning goals, and we partnered not just with Clemson, but also with UC Berkeley, who's going to be studying the adoption habits and needs that this services for individuals to really understand how are people making the decisions when they decide to take on autonomous mobility solutions. So we're really excited about all of these different ones because it gives us a good understanding, not just of the user, but also the client base and what do they need. And now we're really turning our sights onto city centers and thinking about low speed lanes or thinking about pedestrian zones and how to support those types of initiatives in city centers through mobility solutions such as this. Just a little bit more on Clemson. So this is a picture of the campus. Here are some of the other partners. The third one that I didn't mention in the previous slide is Argonne Labs. So Argonne Labs, they're going to be helping taking a lot of the data from the sustainability side and helping us understand what are the CO2 emissions from business as usual, from standard buses, and how does that then compare to our smaller 6-seaters, and because you not only can you platoon, but then you can also divide, and you can then improve the area of access with these vehicles. How does that then help overall sustainability in terms of CO2 emissions for a campus such as this, when you can use an alternative such as ours? And so those are some of the sort of the learning goals that we're hoping to have, while at the same time just providing a service that people need on the campus in terms of connecting them and making things a little bit more efficient in terms of how people move around. We're also looking at paratransit here. So for example, imagine somebody gets injured and they need door-to-door solutions. We're also partnering with Clemson to use our solution in that context as well. So the other thing that's been exciting here is, how do you listen to the community to understand what new use cases they may have that we are able to then provide our solution to. And that's it as far as the general overview and general perspective that we have on what is a safe, practical, honest, and community-oriented way towards building sustainable autonomous mobility solutions for communities. And I appreciate and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And I just want to remind the attendees that we will have time for questions at the end of the presentations. And with that, let me share my screen and pass the mic to Julie.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I tried to start my video and it says I cannot because the host has stopped it.
Oh, I thought you wanted me to share my screen. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you go ahead. You go ahead. I thought I could also, don't worry about it. You go right ahead. Okay. So thank you so much for having me to join you today to talk about our future and autonomy, because the North Carolina DOT is doing a lot of really interesting work in this space. Advance. So we always try and start at the DOT with what problem we're trying to solve. Autonomous vehicles can be fun, they can be cute, they can be tiny, but we always want to make sure that we're actually solving problems with the things that we do. And so when we think of autonomous shuttles and transit, we're thinking about two particular problems we think they can be a piece of the solution to. So one is safety, because humans make errors. These products have proven themselves with their autonomous features to be very safe. And the second piece is access to the economy. So we know when we look at census data that roughly about 600,000 North Carolinians report that they don't have a vehicle associated with their household. And we think beyond that, perhaps your vehicle is unreliable, perhaps you share it with more adults in your household, so it's not always available to you. Perhaps you are unable to drive. So we estimate that it's probably more like 1 million North Carolinians don't have reliable access to a vehicle. So autonomous transit can be another way to link people to their economy. And when we participate in our economy, we know that that's good for everybody. Advance. So one of the really important reasons that we are getting into this space is that when we build infrastructure at the DOT, we build it for the next 50 years. We lay concrete, and that concrete's going to be there, and that project to be there for probably at least 50 years, if not longer. And as fast as transportation is changing, we're asking ourselves, gosh, do these investments even make sense in 10 years, let alone 50? And so this was really a driving issue for us and thinking about getting into the autonomous space to begin to understand it better to help inform the investments we're making today. Advance. So I'll give you an example. This is a artist rendering of what will be the future Charlotte Gateway Station. So if you're familiar with with riding our trains between Raleigh and Charlotte, you know that when you get off in Charlotte, you don't get off the train in the heart of the city, where you should. So many years ago, our department and our rail division had the foresight to buy some property in uptown Charlotte across the street from Panther Stadium and the baseball team. Thank goodness they had that foresight long ago, because if anybody attempted to buy a piece of property like that today, it would be astronomically expensive. So we stand on the shoulders of greats who had this kind of long-term vision. So we are doing a P3 with the city of Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, Charlotte City Partners, and a developer to develop a multi-use, multimodal transportation center right there in the heart of uptown. You see the track work there in the rendering. The DOT took the lead in doing the track work. It's well underway. And then the renderings there of your tall buildings are the artist renderings of what that development may look like. The reason I draw attention to this in this talk is, as we're building 50-year investment here, we have to think about what will transportation look like in the next 50 years. So for example, we've got an EIS, an environmental impact statement, already done on the Atlanta to Charlotte high-speed rail. It's a planning document. It's a first step in a long process to build greenfield high-speed rail of that kind of size. But we want to make sure this station contemplates that could come in the future. And so this station has been planned to allow for that future rail connection when it comes to be. And then we're even starting to think about how we weave in a vertiport. So hopefully you attended our transportation summit back in 2020 in January before COVID. And we had a demo there, and I'm going to share more with you later in these slides, of an air taxi. So they already exist. They are operating. And so we want to make sure at the time at which in the future our world looks like the Jetsons and we have air taxis traveling around, that this multimodal transportation center has a space prepared for that future technology. Advance. So this is the e-hang demonstration that we did in 2020 at our transportation summit, and I've got a video for you.
Yet another historic day in North Carolina. You know, the Wright brothers made North Carolina first in flight 116 years ago. But first in flight isn't just something that we were, it's something that we are. Today, we'll have the first in the nation public demonstration of an autonomous flight, and we look forward to what's happening with the potential for this technology, not only in our state, but across the world.
So I'm so thrilled to be here again, after 6 years graduation from Duke. And so together, we're not only talking about first in flight, like 100 years ago, we're talking about like first in urban air mobility. So with the support, with the help of NCDOT as well as FAA, we're standing here to witness that. And this is the very beginning of transforming the two-dimensional transportation system into 3D. And I think now, let's take our time and let's just witness the future and create the future together. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. So as you can see, the future is here. We were really pleased to host this first ever US public demo flight. These EHangs are flying commercially in China already, and there are a number of major investors in this space to bring these e-taxis to fruition. As you saw, it is fully autonomous. One of the things that often strikes me is when we talk about autonomy when it comes to drones or air taxis or transit shuttles, the features are also similar, that we can really learn from all of the various ways in which mobility is changing in the autonomous sphere. Advance. So as I mentioned, drones are also in this autonomous space. And that is another place where the DOT is spending a lot of time thinking about how the future in autonomy in our airspace is also changing and how we prepare for it. And you can see a number of companies we have partnered with here to do a multitude of different things, from package delivery to lab delivery to bridge inspection. We are exploring with many partners all of the ways in which drones can both support the work we do on our infrastructure and in terms of mobility. And so this is another way the agency is really leaning into understanding these future modes. Advance. Our very first experience with an autonomous shuttle was through our CASI program. You see here our CASI shuttle when she was at the Wright brothers. That was in fact our third deployment. Our first deployment with the CASI shuttle was at our transportation summit in 2020, where she did a route that was on the convention center property in Raleigh. So a closed road kind of opportunity for people to experience the autonomy. Then we did a deployment in partnership with NC State on Centennial campus, and had a wonderful start to it. And then COVID hit, and we put her into storage for a while. And then good for NC State, they got into the PPE business. And so we needed to get her out of storage so they could do PPE production. And so the third place we launched her was at the Wright brothers, which was a really great deployment for understanding a couple different things. For one, when it comes to limited mobility, so the National Park Service experiences thousands and thousands of people visiting the Wright brothers Memorial every year. And if you've ever visited it, and you can kind of tell in this picture, it involves a lot of walking. Anywhere where a flight was going to take off is, of course, a very big space, right, for a runway. And so a lot of the feedback that I heard directly from people who visited it that were seniors were what a wonderful option it gave them to see the whole site from the convenience of the shuttle. She's got all that glass, she's air conditioned, and they could ride the CASI all the way around and really take in the entire national park. So we know a lot about how it can really expand people with limited mobility and expand where they can go. Other things that we learned were about mowing. So just a simple weed on the side of the road can impact her LiDAR and radar. So as a DOT, thinking about autonomy and things like the roadside are important lessons for us to learn. And then deployment of the wheelchair ramp. So as people who build curb and gutter and sidewalks and ADA facilities, understanding how an autonomous shuttle does its wheelchair ramp deployment and learning from that experience. And then lastly, understanding how pedestrians interface with autonomous shuttles is a really important lesson. I myself, when I was riding it, was really struck that, of course, people like to walk in the road at the Wright brothers. And when they see this little shuttle coming over their shoulder, they think, oh, it's fine, that car will go around me, because that's what cars typically do with drivers. But an autonomous shuttle doesn't do that. An autonomous shuttle slows down and waits for the pedestrian to get out of the path. And so they effectively sort of slow roll behind the pedestrian, and the pedestrian kept looking over the shoulder with a bit of a look of like, I think this thing's stalking me. So it's really interesting also to think about how we're going to adjust the humans when they interact with the autonomous shuttles. Advance. So, one of the important things is to look at all the different technologies and understand how they work. So we actually today, we're working on a different company and their autonomy, a company called Perrone Robotics. We arranged for a demo in Charlotte at ITS America that's taking place today. She is the van that we have there is a traditional transit van, and they put the AV technology onto that van. And I will tell you that just like every demo we've done, we learned something from every one of them. That one we brought in, did the testing in the Charlotte area, and our first planned route didn't work well with the technology. So our team did what they do really well. They went to work trying to find another site and worked diligently until they could find another one that would work better. So with all of these, there's a learning process. Anytime you're doing something cutting edge, you know that it's trial and error, it's a learning process, and this has been no different in that space as well. Advance. So for Western North Carolina, the question that I know you're asking yourselves is, how can we prepare today? And that's what we're all about at the DOT, is thinking that same question. So first and foremost, we'd recommend to get out and experience the technology. And I'll tell you a story about that. So I had a boss who said, Julie, you gotta go see Brightline in Florida, the train and the development down there, it's a game changer. And I said, I've looked at the website, I've read the reports, I don't like to travel, I'm good, I'm familiar with it. And my boss said, nope, you're gonna go, you're gonna see it firsthand. So I said, yes, sir. So I traveled to Florida and spent 2 days with the Brightline folks, understanding their business model, going firsthand and seeing Miami Station, seeing the development, going to their maintenance yard and seeing firsthand the technology behind the maintenance yard. There is no substitute for actually going and experiencing something new. I will tell you that it set off lights for me and connections like I never could have imagined, and really spurred me to come back and dive really headfirst into the S-Line project that we are doing to connect the Southeastern high-speed rail corridor in a really similar way to Brightline. So I want to say, find those places and spaces, those conferences and demos that are happening, and get out and experience them firsthand. There's no substitute for it. Talk to others who have deployed autonomous vehicles. So until you've actually done it, you really can't understand the challenges in it. We have a top-notch engineer, our special projects multimodal engineer, Stephanie Sudano, hands down the best I've ever worked with in the business. If you have an opportunity, well, you're hearing from her today, but if you want to go deeper, spend time talking to her about what she learned, because there is nothing like deploying it yourself to really teach you those lessons. Ask how they did it, what did they learn, and how was it funded? Because this space is not cheap to be in. So the technology is, still in its early phases, and therefore it's expensive. So unique and creative funding opportunities are important to learn about. Partner with us and other towns on deployments. So we have our Cassie shuttle that we were doing in partnership with others to deploy. We're evaluating other technologies like Perrone Robotics today and determining what our next phase of this will be. So if you have a group of jurisdictions and you have an interest in partnering with us and looking at a deployment, let us know. And then I would encourage you to investigate the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, for grant funding opportunities. It's very recently inked. We are still digesting it. It is enormous. But we believe that there are going to be some interesting opportunities in there that might make some pilots eligible for grant funding. And then we would point to you could look to the Maine Commission on Autonomous Vehicles for the work that they have done. Michigan State University caught my attention because they're going to be deploying an electric full-size autonomous transit bus this coming spring. And that will be the first, full-size transit bus deployment on a route with 2 stops. So we will be watching them keenly to see them take that next step and learn from that. Advance. So what do you need for a successful pilot? You got to solve problems before your problems through really great planning. Those were a lot of the challenges we found along the way. So you got to think about charging stations, vehicle storage areas. For the Cassie, that was a major thing to overcome. She's taller than a traditional parking deck would accommodate. She has to be kept out of the elements and secured. There are maximum and minimum temperatures she has to stay between. She has to have, the charging capabilities in that space. So I will share with you, like at Centennial Campus, we had a tent-like structure purchased and assembled. We had electric run to it. We thought we put fencing around it. We thought we designed this great solution. And then pretty quickly after we put it up, we had a major weather event that came through Raleigh and windstorm, and it picked up our tent and trashed it. And we were back to square one. So that can be a bigger hurdle than maybe we were first aware. Think about your ADA accessibility and think about your awareness of the interface, sidewalks, pedestrians, and such. It's through really, really great planning that you can have a successful pilot. Advance. So that's what I have for you today. I'm so thrilled to be a part of this session, and I'm so glad that you all are thinking about the future in autonomy, and I hope that you will reach out to us in our integrated mobility division to see how we can support you and partner. And I know our division engineer, Mark Gibbs, is on this call. Mark is an amazing division engineer and really forward thinking. And so, Mark, if you find a willing local partner, you know where to find us. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Julie. And with that, let's move on to Stephanie Sudano.
Okay, just wanted to make sure you're seeing my screen.
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. Good afternoon. I'm Stephanie Sudano, and I'm going to really talk a little bit more in depth about the project that Julie mentioned, Project Cassie. I am the multimodal special projects engineer for DOT, and this is one of the very fun projects I've been able to work on. This project began in the spring of 2019, when we secured Cassie and began the process, and it was delivered just before Christmas in 2019. And today we're in the middle of our deployment. I'll be running through our AV shuttle project goals, then I'll touch on the actual shuttle and deployment sites and finish up with a sampling of lessons learned and best practices. You've heard a little bit from Julie, and hopefully I'll complement that and basically go a little bit more in depth. So why did NCDOT undertake this project? Some of the things we wanted to learn were to observe the safety of AV technology firsthand. Julie mentioned how important firsthand experiences, and that played out with this particular deployment. We wanted to learn how the shuttle could serve as a solution for first, last mile, and limited mobility individuals. And we've heard from other speakers who've mentioned that. We wanted to study how pedestrians and other vehicles interact with AVs. We wanted to identify infrastructure needs. Julie talked about that. There are different needs for traditional versus autonomous vehicles, such as the EV charging stations, sidewalk locations, roadway geometry, signage, pavement marking, and storage. We also wanted to see how the shuttle could serve in various transit use cases and communities across the state, big communities and small communities. We wanted to learn about AV and EV. How does it work? What's battery life? What impacts battery life? And just advance AV and EV technology in North Carolina. And then take all of that information and inform policy and rulemaking. All of these thoughts coalesced into our original goals for Project Cassie, which were preparing for our transportation future in North Carolina by deploying advanced AV technology, improving mobility and safety for North Carolina's residents, developing best practices for eventual AV implementation, launching AV shuttles into multiple communities across the state, and advancing the industry with successful deployments. This is a little slide. You've probably seen something or seen something similar, and it just shows the 5 levels of automation. For your information, CASI operates at a level 4 down to 3, 3.5, 4 we'll call it, for approximately 90% of the time on its deployments. And as the previous speaker said, you have to really be careful. Everyone says we have a self-driving vehicle, but there are no level 5 vehicles in operation today in the United States, and it will be years before there are. We believe it's important to work with the technology to help advance it in North Carolina for the improvements in safety and mobility. But again, as you see different deployments around the country and by different vendors, recognize that there's some, you have to be careful about like how much autonomy you're really getting if you're going to do a deployment. And also route selection is very key in determining the amount of time a vehicle remains at a higher level of automation. You can take an autonomous vehicle and put it on a route and say you've got it on the route, and then it could perhaps be in manual mode for 90% of the time and autonomous mode for only 10%. We didn't want to do that. CASI is an Easy Mile, Easy 10 Generation 3 shuttle. It was the very first Generation 3 Easy Mile in the United States. It's driverless, it's electric, and it's 13.5 feet long, 9.5 feet tall, and about 6 feet wide. These shuttles, as I said before, are designed to run their routes at approximately 90% of the time in autonomy level 4, and that does have a lot to do with route selection. It requires a safety operator and has accessibility ramp and tie downs. It has a maximum operating speed of 15 miles per hour, but more generally operates at around 12 miles per hour. The capacity is 6 persons plus a safety operator. So why did we choose a shuttle? Let me explain about that. There are really 2 categories of AVs. When we started looking at this project in 2019, you've got federal motor vehicle safety standard compliant vehicles, and then you have I'm going to call it FMVSS compliant vehicles. So an FMVSS compliant vehicle means the typical car, truck, van that you see on the road today. And it basically, they take one of those vehicles and they just add AV technology to it. CASI is a non-FMVSS compliant, and the way I would describe that is there are vendors out there who kind of create the vehicle to suit the technology. That's the term in 2019 that we were using for to describe AV shuttles. There's some other vans that are described as AV shuttles now, but we were looking for something that would spend the largest amount of time in AV mode, and that one of these AV shuttles definitely met that criteria when we were looking. We wanted something with a wheelchair ramp. We wanted something that was a perfect size to explore small transit. And then we also liked the fact that it has a unique look, which helped to advertise and call attention to something that was different. And we find that as a positive because one of our goals was also educating people about autonomous technology and introducing them to it. Our first deployment, as Julie said, was at the NCDOT Transportation Summit at the Convention Center in downtown Raleigh. It was in January 2020, and we had a 2,000-foot route from the loading area into Red Hat Amphitheater, and then we looped back. It was there was a maximum speed of 7 to 8 miles because it was quite congested of an area. We had approximately 300 riders. And at that time, we were able to put 12 people in the vehicle. Our second deployment was at North Carolina State Centennial Campus in January, February 2020. Our ridership totaled 260 people. We lasted for 3 weeks before we were shut down for COVID. There always seem to be unique things about each deployment that we have had so far. And for this particular deployment, there were 2 things. First, there was NHTSA issued a temporary suspension of passenger carrying for Easy Mile shuttles. This was later resolved by the addition of seatbelts and a lower passenger capacity on all Easy Mile shuttles. But before that was resolved, a COVID state of emergency was issued in North Carolina. And then thirdly, as Julie said, the storage facility was turned into a 24/7 COVID PPE manufacturing facility. And so we had to leave NC State. Our third deployment was the Wright Brothers National Memorial, and the dates were April through July of this year. For 13 weeks, our ridership was 3,335, and that was with COVID restrictions. We took 774 trips. Our route was 1.2 miles. We traveled 10 to 12 miles per hour, and the shuttle was open to the public, and we stopped at both the visitor center and the sculpture. We had a survey, and we didn't get a lot of responses initially, but the National Park Service, that they were our partner, and they developed some I Rode the Cassie shuttle stickers, and we ended up getting 364 shuttle responses. So now on to some lessons learned and best practices, and a note. Since a very recent deployment, which is the Perrone robotics demo that Julie talked about, that's going on this week, we have learned and substantiated that lessons learned vary with different vendor technology and vehicles. So we will be interested in the future to have experience with different vendors and their technology, which differs a little bit. So under the category of AV technology, some of the major things we've learned is it is still a pilot technology. When you read newspaper articles and talk to people, you would think it's not, but it is in all cases still pilot technology. Stops are very sudden. Weather and rain impacts the LiDAR sensors, and the speed is very slow. Whether you're in a shuttle, which has a 15 mile per hour or so speed, or whether you're in an FMVSS compliant, some of them can go up to 25 miles per hour. It's still a pretty slow speed. You have to choose your route accordingly. Under route selection is key. As I've said before, it impacts greatly the amount of time that your vehicle remains in autonomous mode. We also learned that a lack of hardscape requires quite a bit of signage to be added for localization for the Easy Mile. And by hardscape, I mean buildings and hard buildings adjacent to your right-of-way. But then with our Perrone robotics demo, we learned that tall building hardscape can interrupt essential GPS signals. So you really need a balance, and you have to consider both things. With respect to people, Julie touched on this. People expect autonomous vehicles to operate and behave like regular vehicles, and they don't. And I'll go a little bit more into detail later on. But people that rode the shuttles were generally interested and supportive. Under operations, your vendor is key. A good contract, excellent communications, honesty, and ability to discuss anything. It's just like with any contract, really. Collaborative problem solving with your vendor, and also I would add experience of your vendor. The operator is also absolutely key. That is the person, the safety operator is in the shuttle all the time that it's operating. And in our case, we weren't there. That operator was the only person that was there consistently. Not only do their skills matter, but experience matters, their personality. They're really an ambassador for autonomous technology. Consistency, their consistency in taking those actions and those protocols that you need for them to take, and their diligence in following those protocols and collecting data is very important. Under infrastructure, street trees can be a challenge. There were several sites we had to eliminate because they had very mature street trees. One was at the beach, and it had oaks, and you have to trim the street trees to provide enough clearance for these vehicles. And so there were a couple that would have been too much trimming on street trees. Sidewalk is needed for wheelchair ramp deployment. And we, by the way, we learned that you can actually rent wheelchair ramps and platforms. And fast growing vegetation, grass or weeds beside the road can actually slow the shuttle down. At Wright Brothers, they had to cut the grass every couple of days because the grass was so fast growing and it did interrupt the service. This would be different with different vendors and different variables that they build into the sensor technology. And then, as Julie mentioned, finding storage. That was probably our single biggest challenge, was finding storage for this vehicle at different sites. Under the regulatory category, include and collaborate with your DMV and police and other emergency agencies early and often. Begin your NHTSA permitting process early. You only need that if you're operating a non-compliant, non-FMVSS compliant vehicle. And then remember, in North Carolina, public and private streets are subject to the same regulations. We initially planned to do some deployments on private roadways so that we could get on the road quicker. But in North Carolina, according to North Carolina law, both of those, any road that the public can access, whether it's a public or private road, is subject to public road regulations and NCDMV's registration process. With respect to best practices, we would recommend a formal risk assessment. We went through that process with the National Park Service. It was an excellent one. Weekly project meetings with the whole team. On-site observations initially. Once you deploy one of these shuttles or vehicles, the project manager really needs to hang around for the first week or so and observe the deployment in all sorts of situations, just to ensure that there are no problems. We also recommend a shared deployment diary. We shared one of those, collaborated on one of those online. And we also recommend sending in occasional passenger observers to monitor and tweak, if needed, the service operator functions. Conducting hands-on field training for police, fire, EMS with the shuttle, and then having a written emergency response plan and contacts listed on board the shuttle and with all partners. Julie mentioned the shuttle, the experience with the shuttle and the pedestrian at the Wright Brothers National Memorial, and the fact that the person that was walking, expected the shuttle to go around them, but the shuttle, technology had it slow down and sort of follow or stop. The walker felt like they were being stalked. She mentioned that. And once the safety operator recognized that was a problem, they got with National Park Service, and the two of them National Park Service came up with a sign, which I thought was pretty clever, posted it where those pedestrians park, and then talked with the pedestrians to explain that the autonomous vehicle actually is going to behave a little different from a traditional vehicle. So it was a very successful solution and a very interesting situation that we would not have anticipated or planned for. Lastly, a sampling of Wright Brothers open-ended rider survey results. You can read them here. My kids loved it. The driver was knowledgeable and fun. Safety operator makes all the difference. And he knew a lot about the site and the vehicle. Here's someone that said not unsafe, but I felt impractical with current technology limitations. Someday that person will have more confidence. And a lot of people said something like the very last one, I would ride because it's easier when you're less able to walk. That's basically my presentation, and I would encourage you to look forward to the next deployment location. We're coordinating with 3 different communities right now and hoping to get Cassie back out in the spring. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And our last presenter is Erin Clark.
Hi, everybody. Let me just share my screen here. Okay, thanks for having me. My name is Erin Clark. I'm a policy analyst with the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure in Pittsburgh. My role primarily focuses on automated mobility technology in the city. I, to some degree, act as a liaison between the city, the industry, and the public, and encouraging and supporting automated solutions that support the city's mobility goals. So I just wanted to quickly give an introduction to my department. We're a fairly young department. We were established in 2017, and we were kind of born out of the city's planning and public works departments. So my department, mobility and infrastructure, we call it DOMI for short, is responsible for the transportation of people and goods throughout the city and for managing the operation of and access to the public right-of-way. So that includes the sidewalks, curbs, streets, and over 400 bridges that make up our network. Our city's mobility principles are that no one dies or is seriously injured traveling on city streets. Every household in Pittsburgh can access fresh fruits and vegetables within 20 minutes travel of home and without the requirement of a private vehicle. All trips less than 1 mile are easily and enjoyably achieved by non-vehicle travel. The combined cost of transportation, housing, and energy does not exceed 45% of household income for any income group, and that the design, maintenance, and operation of city streets reflects the values of our community. So I thought it'd be helpful to provide just a quick timeline of automated vehicle testing in Pittsburgh. So Carnegie Mellon University is known as the birthplace of automated vehicle technology, and they have actually been testing AVs in Pittsburgh since the 1980s. Jumping ahead many years, Uber Advanced Technologies Group, Uber ATG, began testing AVs on public streets in Pittsburgh in 2016. We then saw several other companies follow and establish a presence in Pittsburgh. And in 2021, a company, Aurora, that's testing here acquired Uber ATG. So we currently have 4 organizations testing and developing level 4 automated passenger vehicles in Pittsburgh, and that's Carnegie Mellon, Argo AI, Aurora, and Motional. We've been talking a lot about automated shuttles, which we're really interested in and excited about here in Pittsburgh, but we do have more experience in the kind of testing and development realm with the kind of passenger vehicles. So a lot of folks in other cities, when I talk to them, often ask, how do we get AV testing and pilots in our city? And the truthful answer for Pittsburgh is that our talent pool and long history in AV technology, thanks to Carnegie Mellon and the University of Pittsburgh, has made Pittsburgh really attractive to these companies. In addition, Pittsburgh has a really complex environment. If anyone on the call today has come to Pittsburgh, you know that our topography, our infrastructure, I mentioned over 400 bridges, complex intersections, and our unpredictable at times weather makes us a very interesting location to test and develop the technology. The city government also prioritizes an open relationship with the AV developers, and Pittsburgh offers a great quality of life in terms of affordability and resources. So I wanted to provide a quick overview of the policies and guidelines that currently exist around AV testing and deployments in Pittsburgh, or in Pennsylvania rather. And so PennDOT, our state DOT, has released a highly automated vehicle testing guidance and authorization process. So Pennsylvania currently doesn't have any state laws kind of governing AV testing or deployments. And so PennDOT has kind of proactively taken the approach to release testing guidance and authorization, but there's no, real legal remedy or way that PennDOT can require compliance with some of these guidelines right now. So we are expecting state legislation in the future, but for now, all the operators operating in Pennsylvania submit a notice of testing to PennDOT and essentially an application and receive an authorization letter. In Pittsburgh specifically, because there's no kind of state formal state requirements, we also have taken it upon ourselves to create some local guidelines and policies. We are the only city or general region in the state that has AV testing. We're not seeing many AV deployments or testing happening in Philadelphia, for instance. And so in 2019, our current mayor, Mayor Peduto, issued an executive order titled Self-Driving Vehicle Testing and Operations. And that executive order essentially directs the department to collaborate with the industry to release an annual report, which I'll talk about later. It also sets expectations that the industry will coordinate and communicate with the city. In addition to that executive order, my department, the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, released what we call Pittsburgh Shared and Autonomous Mobility Principles. I'll walk through those in a minute. In 2019 as well, and a local testing guidelines and submission process for for the testers that are operating in Pittsburgh that I mentioned earlier. So I quickly just wanted to walk through our shared and autonomous mobility principles. I think these are really important, especially as we're kind of nearing more industry standards and hopefully getting some momentum at the state and federal levels in terms of kind of more formal regulations around autonomous mobility. We thought it was really important at the local level in advance of that, and while we're in this kind of before period, that we set our expectations for what we value as a community and what we expect for our AV developers that are operating in Pittsburgh and any future operators who comes into our market. So we focused on people, planet, place, performance, and really wanted to be sure that we were emphasizing and prioritizing people and human safety. So especially those people outside of the vehicles, those more vulnerable road users, promoting shared high occupancy vehicles for people and freight, and by protecting mass transit, ensuring that this technology supplements and encourages high occupancy vehicles and public transit. And by increasing open and shared data with these companies and empowering our stakeholders with tools and resources and education to meaningfully participate in shaping our local policies. So my department convenes 3 what we call autonomous mobility working groups. The first group is our shared and autonomous mobility advisory group. It's comprised of representatives from various community groups, business improvement districts, and advocacy organizations. So you can think about our BIDs as well as our bike pedestrian advocacy organizations, organizations that represent the food insecure, that represent older adults, et cetera. And so that's a pretty diverse group that we try to convene. We also have our autonomous vehicle policy partners. So those are comprised of city, county, regional, and state department representatives generally. And then we have our industry group, our autonomous vehicle testers group. So that's comprised of representatives from the 4 AV testers that are operating on public streets in Pittsburgh. And so each of these working groups meets bi-monthly with DOMI staff. And in addition to that, DOMI staff meets one-on-one with each of the individual AV testers, usually just on a phone call, a check-in each month. But it gives us an opportunity to kind of talk one-on-one, discuss things with individual companies that they may not feel comfortable, discussing among the larger group meetings that we have bi-monthly. And so these groups, very generally speaking, discuss how this technology can appropriately support the city's efforts to improve road safety, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduce traffic congestion, encourage efficient land use, and increase access to mobility and economic opportunities for all Pittsburghers. And in addition to those working groups, our local advocacy organizations are also very involved in following this industry, the testing that's happening in Pittsburgh, and serving their stakeholders. So this is just an example. This is actually a survey from 2019 The pandemic kind of delayed efforts to get this survey back out in 2020 or 2021, but I think there are plans in early 2022, hopefully, to release another survey. This survey was done by Bike Pittsburgh, a bike pedestrian advocacy organization here in Pittsburgh. And these are their like high level findings that I've put there. But they have more detail and individual questions from their surveys on their website. But you know, I think interestingly, even those vulnerable road users are the most excited about this technology. So I think when Bike Pittsburgh first did their first survey in 2017, I believe, and then a follow-up in 2019. And I think they kind of expected some criticism, but they got really positive survey results. I think what the promises this industry is, you know, articulating right now, at least, will really benefit those vulnerable road users and make our streets safer, slow down traffic. And so I think those organizations in particular are really supportive, but they really want to have a seat at the table during the development of the technology. And we're seeing more of the collaboration between the AV industry and bike ped advocacy organizations. Just last week, Argo, a company that's operating in Pittsburgh, and the League of American Bicyclists released an autonomous vehicle guidelines for safe driving around cyclists. And I know some of our stakeholder organizations were excited to see that. And I think it's a step in the right direction that we're seeing happen more frequently. And then wanted to walk through some of our lessons learned, which I think really overlap with some of the learnings NCDOT was presenting as well. I think what we have learned is that open and consistent communication between government, the public, and private sector has been really critical in learning and kind of adjusting and evolving as this technology is being tested in Pittsburgh and continues to kind of grow in terms of volume of testing. We also I think it's really important to encourage the industry to be providing public education and engaging with communities. And that means real public education, not marketing materials. So we have this conversation a lot, and often I'm able to take information from the industry and kind of act as that liaison and then present it to the public. But I do hope we can get to a point, you know, soon in the future where there's much more direct interaction and engagement from the industry directly with our communities. I think it's really important. I think this is something Julie mentioned in her presentation, but we always want to ask first, is more technology the most appropriate solution for this problem and for this community? You know, this technology is really exciting and it holds a lot of promise, but sometimes the solution a community needs is a bus shelter or a better sidewalk or some traffic calming that really can resolve their issues as opposed to kind of introducing more technology. It's really important to be transparent with the public. I think we didn't necessarily have the dedicated staff capacity to do some of the engagement that we're doing now when Uber first launched in Pittsburgh. And so having those conversations with those advocacy organizations and directly with the public has really increased some of that trust and resolved some concerns from some community members. And I think it's really important to collaborate with other, you know, I'm talking from a city perspective, so with other cities, but also with other states, identifying the tools and levers that we have to influence the design and deployment of AVs so that they align with the goals of our cities and states. And as you can see on the right, we release annually an autonomous vehicle testing report. So that's just the first page, a glimpse of the first page of last year's report, and we'll be releasing the 2020 report later this month. And I will stop there. Thank you guys for having me, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Erin, and thank you to all of our panelists. We are at the point where we're going to open the floor to questions. I'm actually going to turn this over to Hannah, the MPO's TDM coordinator, to moderate.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to ask the panelists to turn on their cameras if possible, so we can start question and answer time, if that's possible. I couldn't turn mine on, so maybe not.
Yeah, it's not letting me turn mine on. It says the host has stopped it.
Same for me.
Same.
Same.
Okay, so we'll just move into question and answer. If anybody has any questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A option in the bottom of your screen, or you can drop it in the chat. The first question comes from Grant Millen, and he asked about hydrogen systems and how they are playing a role in CAV technology in North Carolina, and whether the city of Asheville has the capacity to take on CAV research and development. And I guess that's directed more towards the NCDOT folks, if anyone has any answer to that.
Is that
Go
you?
ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah, well, I was going to say I'm unfamiliar with it, so I can't really answer that question.
Yeah, I was going to say same. I don't know about the hydrogen capabilities out in the Asheville area.
Our next question is from George Webb, and he asked about, this is also for the NCDOT presenters. What's the status, like the regulation, legislation, and implementation, the status of the connected and automated vehicle technology in legislation right now?
So Stephanie can speak to this as well. So the legislation originally passed in North Carolina a few years ago really envisioned a future state of technology different than what has materialized. It's sort of the tricky thing about legislation is you're trying to write for something that isn't standardized yet, that doesn't exist yet. So I'll give you an example. We were trying to bring a non-FBMSS vehicle, the CAV, the Easy Mile Shuttle, here, and the laws still required the vehicle to have a steering wheel, for example. And of course, the CAV shuttle wasn't built with a steering wheel. It required mirrors, and of course, she didn't need mirrors because she had cameras. So those are the kind of learning experiences I think that are helping inform what future legislation looks like. And of course, you have your traditional auto manufacturers who are involved in that conversation as well as their systems each are unique. So I think it's an ever evolving conversation around what the laws need to look like, informed by our experiences. And I will say that the General Assembly here, I think, is really forward thinking. They passed the autonomous laws that they passed in advance of the technology because they wanted to be clear and say, we're interested in having this technology here. We want to be a forward-leaning state in this space. So if we think of the street-based vehicles, they've passed legislation to enable the drones to take place in North Carolina in a robust way. They recently passed some legislation to allow delivery robots that are autonomous to be in our state. So I think it's constantly evolving, and I think our General Assembly wants us in this technology space. Stephanie, do you have any additional thoughts?
Sure, Julie, I can add a couple of things. First, I did want to call attention to an FAV committee that the legislature had NCDOT set up, and it meets, pretty regularly. So anyone who's interested, we could put you in touch with someone to get on that committee, or at least able to tune in when that committee meets. And they will generally have speakers, and they'll talk about things like the legislative situation and what's up there. But so I wanted to call attention to that. And then I also wanted to say that years ago, and I don't remember which year, Julie, you may, maybe 5 years ago, the NC legislature did pass a rule that says that fully autonomous vehicles can deploy in North Carolina. And that was actually an extremely progressive law and move for North Carolina to make. What happened when we decided that we wanted to deploy an autonomous vehicle, that's when we found out that because we chose a non-FMVSS compliant vehicle, that is when we discovered that we were really not covered under that law. And so we had to go and find some ways. It was pretty tricky, but we had to kind of navigate along with DMV a way for us to deploy the shuttle in North Carolina. And that basically meant a NHTSA waiver, which the federal government requires for those vehicles anyway. And then it required addressing some of those unique equipment requirements that is in our North Carolina DMV law, but that is not necessary for an AV vehicle. So we navigated kind of a tougher path because we had a non-FMVSS compliant vehicle, but an FMVSS compliant vehicle like Perrone Robotics, we had no NHTSA, variants that we had to get. And North Carolina law allowed for that because it was an FMVSS compliant vehicle. So I would say North Carolina is progressive, in my opinion, in having that law on the books. I think they're also progressive in that, when there have been hurdles in our deployments, we have just worked in tandem in collaboration with those agencies like DMV and also NCDOT safety office or safety division to resolve those issues and be able to deploy. And then that coupled with the FAV committee, which is keeping its finger on the pulse of things, FAV, trying to bring additional stakeholders into the mix. I think that's a very good thing for North Carolina.
Just to jump in, can you repeat the name of that legislative committee?
It's the Fully Autonomous Vehicle Committee, and it's not, the legislature required the DOT to set it up. So I would say it's not a legislative committee, but it's a DOT-led committee. And if I can, I'll see if I can share some information with you in the chat box while we're talking.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I was muted. I didn't realize it. We're going to jump to a question for Erin. Do you know Carnegie Mellon's, do you know if Carnegie Mellon's research has primarily moved from connected and automated vehicles to the autonomous environment? And how much contact do you have with the university on how this technology is advancing?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the question. I saw that in the Q&A box. I do work and communicate often with Raj, who was mentioned in the question. And I don't think, don't take me at my word, but I don't think the university's research has moved away from connected vehicle research, but at least in my work, like focusing more on automated vehicle technology, I do know that, generally speaking, the industry knows that if they're going to be able to successfully deploy in urban environments, they can't rely on cities upgrading all of our infrastructure to be connected and quote unquote smart. And so they really are focusing on getting their technology to a point where they can deploy in environments regardless of whether there's kind of connectivity to signs and signals and infrastructure. And so we have like separated those conversations, at least in Pittsburgh to some degree. But I think CMU is definitely still very involved in the connected vehicle space, but it just doesn't overlap as closely with my day-to-day work.
Thank you for that answer. This is, I guess, a question for everybody. This is coming from our panel. How should we be communicating with people about how to act around these vehicles to avoid some of the concerns presented?
I can speak to that first. I think public education is a really important thing that's, not getting as much attention or funding from the industry. And I think it's going to take some level of collaboration between the industry and local government, especially state and local government, to accomplish that. I think on the one hand, we've made it kind of clear to the industry testing here that we don't want to have any expectation that our pedestrians change their behavior to accommodate AV technology. I think that's different though from education and getting the public to understand how an AV, I think NCDOT gave some examples, how an AV might operate a little bit differently than a human driven vehicle. And so that, pedestrians and vulnerable road users have an expectation of how the vehicle is going to operate. But kind of the, idea that we should be requiring or encouraging pedestrians and vulnerable road users to change their behavior in order to accommodate the technology, I think is a little troubling to us at this stage. So we're trying to find that balance of kind of the public education, just in terms of preparation and a clear understanding.
I'm happy to go next. This is Jenny Lars Berlin. Our perspective is that this technology to truly be fully autonomous and fully integrated into the environment is going to take several decades. If you look at the adoption of new technologies, if you look at the Ford Model T or other technologies that have been invented in the past, there's generally sort of this 30-year timeline to and the technology, implement the technology, and sort of weave it into modern society. And I think to people's points here, it's still very much a learning phase that we're in. Everybody, all of us here are still very much in a learning phase. And so the way that we usually like to approach it when we're engaging with communities is to start from a place of questions. To help people just feel comfortable telling us what are their questions about the system, what are their perceptions about the system, what are their expectations about the system, because I think as somebody mentioned, there's a lot of marketing speak, but then there's also real speak. And so how do we try to bridge those gaps? Because it's in that understanding of folks' starting points that then we can really build robust communication campaigns that are rooted from a place of listening. And then I think the other piece is how do we understand what those perceptions are so that we can also build a common language. It's easy sometimes for me to forget some of the nomenclature because I just hear people talking about it all the time, but that's new for certain people. And so how do we have those conversations as well so that we can start to understand what is that common vernacular that we can all feel comfortable with, to explain where the technology is today, to explain what it's going to take to get it to be to the place that people want it to be, and what does that then mean in terms of how the technology needs to be responsive to the environments that they're in, because it is going to be messy for a while. That's just the nature of technology and understanding of the technology, that different people are going to be at different levels of awareness, and that can be by choice. And so it is the technology that needs to be thoughtful, safe, and measured in that process, because otherwise it will have an adverse impact on the technology and the industry as a whole. So those are just some thoughts.
I'm actually going to jump in with a quick question for you, Jenny. Could you tell us a little bit more about the usage of programs that Optimus Ride has held and how that's impacted the support of workforce needs in communities?
Yeah, I think what's been exciting there is thinking about how people can grow through the learning of this technology. So I guess I'll talk about it in two ways. One is, how do we sort of deploy in locations? And so when we come to a site, we do partner with a particular client, whether it's a developer, a nonprofit, or the owner of the particular site. And so then we try to understand, what does the service design look like, and what's the type of expertise that's going to be needed at a location. What we've observed is that you need a mix of marketing, customer service, general management, and operational management, fleet management, if you will, and technical technician capabilities that marry software, basic software capabilities, and basic hardware, mechanical engineering capabilities. And so what we try to do is hire locally and partner those teams with our home office, engineering, operational, and marketing teams, so that then you have a bit of a decentralized model that's still connected to matrix leaders at the home office. And so then people can get exposure both ways, right? The technical teams developing the technology need to have that back and forth dialogue with the local team, and the local team needs to have that back and forth dialogue with the home office, so that then there can be a robust understanding about what the community is and what it looks like, but then also from the home office in terms of how the technology improvements are being prioritized based on what is happening in the field. And on the marketing side, it's, what are those questions? What is it that people need to understand? How are they engaging? What is some folks were talking about signage, but even just signage to educate people, even if they're not using the service of, is this an autonomous zone, and what is the wayfinding that's useful for people, and understanding where are the stops, or where are the what are the paths that are being used or not. Our vehicles are in environment, so they are FMVSS certified, and so they are engaging in the public road with other vehicles while still being low speed, which kind of helps with traffic calming in general. But does that get to your question? I want to make sure that I answered the question in terms of just how people grow. Okay. Okay, great. Yep. And I will say, for some of our staff that have started sort of as an operations teams, have also grown to other aspects in the company, going into engineering or going into account management and sales.
Thank you, Jenny, for that answer. This is going back to NC folks. Is NC trying to follow or influence anything in the CAV world, or are we just taking a waiting position instead of focusing on the autonomous technology and implementation? And George asked this specifically for Julie, but if anyone wants to chime in.
No problem. We are working in that space. Kevin Lacey, our state traffic engineer, is the leader in that space for our agency. So I can tell you he is deeply involved in that space. It's just not an area I am deeply involved in, so I can't speak to it. But I would encourage folks to follow along with the committee that Stephanie mentioned, that Kevin staffs. He is often speaks on the work they're doing at various conferences throughout the state. So you can always try and connect with his office to find out where he's doing some public speaking in that space.
Thank you, Julie. And we can put that name in the chat for you, George, to get connected with him. This is another question for NC folks. Do you know when this technology will be like available or be advanced enough to work in like Western North Carolina and more mountainous regions? Because I know that Cassie has been in places that it's relatively flat, and we would love for this technology to come up to the mountains with us. What will it take for that technology to advance that much?
Stephanie is the one who's been vetting out potential locations, and I know she's done a lot of work in this space, so I'll defer to her.
Sure. Yes, I think that the battery is probably the biggest challenge with respect to grades. The battery life is impacted by temperature, how steep the grade is, that sort of thing. We did actually identify really 3 sites in Western North Carolina. I'm from Western North Carolina. I was hoping we could get Cassie up there, but it not only, there are other factors also that have to be considered. But yeah, I would say it's the grade for, it's the battery life with respect to the grade. With respect to the technology, I mean, it is here, but it is definitely in pilot stage. My personal opinion, I think it'll be 15 to 20 years at least before it's commonplace. And I personally believe that connected technology is going to be the thing that is really needed to make the autonomous technology, getting everything connected and autonomous is to me going to be when, the system, has, almost the majority of autonomous vehicles. And that'll take a while. I have a couple of cars that are over 20 years old, and it's going to take a while to turn over cars. So I think we'll continue to see things implemented like lane assist and some of those features that are based on the same sort of technology, but fully autonomous vehicles, 15, 20 years plus, in my opinion.
Thank you for that answer. We're going to go back to Grant's question. They kind of outlined it more in the Q&A box. Though this webinar isn't about hydrogen necessarily, is anyone aware of the progress of hydrogen in North Carolina? Or does Jenny or Aaron have any experience with hydrogen cars or hydrogen AV technology? And is there anywhere that we can direct Grant to go for a better answer to these questions?
Unfortunately, I do not know, so I apologize.
Yes, and I'm consulting Mr. Google as we sit here, and I'm looking for any, articles that are, combining hydrogen fuel and AV. I'm not seeing any, although Julie, that conference we went to recently, I believe there was one keynote speaker that did talk about, they had a large presentation on power and on hydrogen. It wasn't necessarily connected, well, it wasn't connected to autonomous vehicles, but it was forward thinking. So I guess to me, it looks like you have hydrogen, fuel cells forward thinking, autonomy forward thinking. So somebody's going to put them together, but I'm actually not seeing anything right now out here, and am unfamiliar with it, unfortunately.
Well, the space we're really in right now in the integrated mobility division in the transit shuttle space is testing the different technologies that are available to us. So I really can't comment beyond that.
Yeah, we don't have a ton of experience in Pittsburgh. We actually just, of our AV testers, Motional just this past year started testing its first fully electric vehicle. But I do know Motional's partnered with Hyundai and use their vehicles for testing. And I think Hyundai has released some hydrogen powered AVs, but not in Pittsburgh. So we haven't had those conversations, but we're definitely generally supportive of electrification and any advancements in the AV industry that are also going to make them a lot cleaner for our cities as well.
We have a question from George that just came in. Jenny, has anyone ever tried to like mess with the vehicles by walking slowly or stopping in front of them while they're working? And how does that affect the day-to-day of the vehicles?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I mean, I think yes is the short answer. People are always trying to test the limits of the technology, and it's just sort of inherent in terms of the power dynamic between human and machine that folks are constantly trying to sort of test the limits. This is exactly why low speed is so necessary, but not low speed that the walker can go faster than the vehicle. You know, where we try to keep our speeds is sort of like 15 miles per hour or 20 miles per hour. And what we try to do when those things happen, and this is why the folks in the vehicle are so important, is we stop the service and we actually just try to engage with the individual and sort of, oh, is this the first time that you're seeing a vehicle like this? What are your thoughts? And in that process of coming from a place of trying to understand where they're coming from, it then takes away from a potentially adversarial relationship to, hey, you want to come into the vehicle and try it on, and maybe you can ask us some more questions in that process, and then you kind of change the dynamic. And that's another reason why we like to partner on a community-based approach, because then we get to know the different folks in the area who might be potential, let's say, contrarians, who are the promoters, but then how do we build community across these? And that's one of the things that we try to do a lot. And that's also part of how the signage plays into it, is to help people know ahead of time, hey, this is an autonomous zone, autonomous vehicle zone. And what does that mean? And so, you know, happy to report we've never had any incidents, but when those types of events happen, these are the ways that we try to de-escalate it and turn it into a positive.
If I could, I'll follow on to what Jenny said. One of the things that we've seen, and Stephanie can speak more to this, we saw it both at Centennial Campus and then at the Wright Brothers, is when you operate at these lower speeds, what you can have are other vehicles sharing the roadway get frustrated and create some really dangerous situations. Stephanie, do you want to talk more about how we saw that and what you did about it?
Sure. Yes, and that especially happened at Wright Brothers, where there's just really wide open space, and there was a pretty wide one-way loop. And after we got the shuttle deployed, people started really dangerously passing. So you can imagine we had the shuttle coming up to get ready to a pedestrian stop, and people were, you know, just passing fast. And so we ended up using those little pop-up signs. They're used a lot for pedestrian crossings, and a combination of those and cones. And we just temporarily narrowed the pavement space so that the vehicles really had to follow behind the shuttle. And we had already put signage out. We had handed out brochures. We had, done everything we thought we could do to advise people, to go slow and just be patient. I mean, there are people on vacation, but we had to take a few extra steps, and everything worked well after that, but we did have to take those extra steps. And I do know that we were concerned on campus because I believe, there are a lot of these shuttle deployments that have been on campuses, and especially the campuses the students like to sort of step in front of the vehicle and test it a lot. And I can see that when I went to visit the vehicle before we brought it to North Carolina. I did some of that myself because I wanted to make sure it would stop. And it did seem like it was fun. I don't advocate that for anyone, but it's amazing how responsive it is. And I can see why people are tempted to do that. But I love your strategy of just engaging with the people, inviting them on board. Jenny, that sounded like a great idea.
Thank you all for those answers. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Hey, this is Sarah Nichols with the Clean Vehicles Coalition at Land to Sky, and I want to thank everyone for giving us the gift of your time, and I'm happy to give you that gift a few minutes back as we kind of wrap this thing up into your day. I hope you all gained some ideas and thoughts that you'll be taking back to your communities, and if you did, let us know. Tell us, what you liked about this, or where we could improve, or maybe we can get to that goal sooner than 15 to 20 years, because there's going to be a lot of money and investment in infrastructure the next few years that if we incorporate some of what we've learned today into those plans, maybe we do see this technology come to the region faster and help start moving people around. If you're needing AICP credits, this webinar will count for those. Let us know if you have any questions to follow up with that, or to our presenters today, I'm going to throw some emails up in the chat box that you can circle back with us to get to our presenters. And if you have other questions about autonomous progress in the region, we're interested in this space. Clearly you are too. And please start a dialogue with us about sites that you have in mind, or things you think we should be doing, places or groups we should be connecting with as we start to move this issue forward. I hope everyone has a great day, and we will look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you. Happy holidays. Bye-bye.
Thank you.